You're driving home on autopilot, and suddenly you realize you've been having three different conversations in your head simultaneously. One about the meeting that happened 4 hours ago, analyzing every word you said and every micro expression you caught. Another about a philosophical question you read last week that you still can't resolve. A third about the expression on your partner's face this morning when they said they were fine, but their voice had that particular hollow quality that means they're not fine at all. You pull into your driveway and realize you can't remember a single moment of the actual drive. Your body was operating the car while your mind was somewhere else entirely, processing, connecting, dissecting. This is your normal. This is every drive, every shower, every moment your hands are busy, but your mind is free. You thought everyone lived like this until someone asked what you were thinking about and you tried to explain, and they looked at you like you'd just spoken in a language they'd never heard before. 3 days ago, you had a casual conversation with a coworker about their weekend plans. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. But you're still there, replaying it frame by frame. The way their voice dropped when they mentioned their partner, the forced brightness in their smile, the half-second pause before they said, "We're fine." Everyone else has forgotten this conversation entirely. They moved on before it even ended, but you're still standing in that moment, turning it over in your hands like a puzzle with missing pieces. Other people's brains seem to work like shallow streams, moving quickly over smooth stones. Yours works like an ocean trench. Every piece of information drops down, down, down through layers of analysis, connection, and meaning, until it reaches depths that most people don't even know exist. You thought everyone did this. You thought everyone lay awake at night thinking about the philosophical implications of a stranger's offhand comment at the grocery store. Psychologists call this cognitive complexity. Your brain doesn't just process information, it creates intricate neural networks around every input, connecting dots that span years, disciplines, and experiences. This isn't the same as overthinking, though people will call it that. Overthinking implies unnecessary repetition. What you're doing is architectural. You're building cathedrals of understanding while other people are putting up tents. But here's what no one warns you about. This depth comes with a price that you pay every single day. You struggle with small talk in a way that feels almost physical. When someone asks how your weekend was, your brain immediately catalogs 12 different ways to answer, analyzing which version they actually want to hear, which would be honest, which would be appropriate, which would reveal too much. By the time you've processed all of this, the conversation has moved on and you've said nothing. People think you're quiet. You're not quiet. You're just living on a different processing speed. While your coworkers discuss the weather and their weekend plans, you're thinking about mortality, about purpose, about the strange miracle of consciousness and the weight of being alive. You want to ask them if they ever feel the absurdity of performing normalcy while spinning on a rock through infinite space. You don't ask. You know what happens when you ask. Research on existential intelligence shows that people with high cognitive complexity experience social alienation at significantly higher rates than the general population. You're not socially awkward because you lack skills. You're isolated because you're speaking a different language. You're seeing in colors that other people's eyes aren't built to process, and that creates a loneliness that most people can't comprehend, because the very thing that isolates you is the thing that prevents you from explaining the isolation. You know this loneliness intimately. It's the feeling of being surrounded by people and completely alone. It's smiling and nodding while someone tells you about their day, and the entire time you're thinking about how strange it is that we're all pretending we're not going to die, that we're not all carrying invisible wounds from childhood, that any of this matters or doesn't matter, and we're all just making it up as we go. Your brain never stops. Even when you're sleeping, it's working. Other people have dreams about flying or showing up to school naked. You have dreams with complete narrative structures, symbolic frameworks, and philosophical implications. You wake up exhausted from dreams that felt like you lived entire other lives, made impossible choices, and learned things you can't quite remember but can still feel. The physical cost of this is real. your body carries the weight of constant mental processing. Tension in your shoulders from bracing against the onslaught of thoughts. Fatigue that sleep doesn't fix because your brain never truly rests. That feeling of being on all the time, like a computer that never shuts down, just dims its screen occasionally. And here's where it gets darker. You see patterns that other people miss. You can read a room within 30 seconds of entering it. You know who's faking their happiness, who's about to break, who's lying to themselves. You can predict how relationships will end before they've really begun. You warned your friend about the person they were dating. You saw the red flags, the subtle manipulations, the way the dynamic was already toxic. They called you negative. They said you were projecting. They stopped talking to you for a while. 6 months later, they called you crying. You were right about everything, but being right doesn't feel like winning. It feels like watching a car crash in slow motion and being powerless to stop it. It feels like being Cassandra, cursed with prophecy that no one believes. This pattern recognition is both gift and curse. You can't turn it off. You see the fault lines in everything: relationships, systems, beliefs, societies. You see where the cracks will spread before anyone else notices the surface damage. And you have to live with this knowledge, watching people walk confidently toward disasters you can see coming from miles away. Your mind is addicted to understanding. When a question appears, you can't let it go. It's 3 a.m. and you're down a research rabbit hole about consciousness, or the nature of memory, or why humans create meaning in a meaningless universe. You've read 12 scientific papers and 23 philosophy articles, and you still don't have an answer, but you can't stop looking. Studies show a significant correlation between high intelligence and anxiety disorders. Your brain's gift for analysis becomes a weapon it turns on itself. Every decision is paralyzed by seeing all possible outcomes. Every mistake is dissected for months, sometimes years. Every social interaction is replayed and examined until you've found every microscopic error you made. This is the part that no one tells you about being a deep thinker. Your gift is also your prison. The same mind that lets you understand complex systems and see beautiful connections also traps you in loops of analysis that feel inescapable. People think you're quiet at parties, in meetings, in group conversations. They think you have nothing to say. The truth is, you're 3 conversations ahead. Someone makes a statement and your brain immediately sees 5 implications, 7 counter-arguments, and 12 tangential connections. By the time you've sorted through all of this and formulated what you actually want to say, the conversation has moved on to a completely different topic. You're not slow. You're not boring. You're just operating on a different frequency. And the frustration of this is something that builds over years until you start to wonder if something is fundamentally wrong with you. Someone once called you distant. They said you never seemed fully present. They couldn't have been more wrong. You were drowning in presence. You were so present that you were noticing everything. The micro expressions on their face, the tone shifts in their voice, the subtext beneath every word, the emotional weight they were carrying that they hadn't named yet. You were so present that you could barely breathe under the weight of your own empathy. But you couldn't explain this, because explaining it would mean revealing the full depth of how you experience the world, and you learned a long time ago that this scares people. They don't want to know that you can feel their pain like it's your own. They don't want to know that you see through their masks. They want you to stay on the surface with them. And your brain doesn't have a surface setting. Research on depressive realism suggests that people with depression actually see the world more accurately than those without it. Deep thinkers experience depression at significantly higher rates than the general population. And it's not hard to understand why. When you see the world clearly, when you really look at human suffering and systemic cruelty, and the ultimate meaninglessness that underlies everything we do, that knowledge has weight. You see beauty and horror simultaneously, and that duality is unbearable. You watch a sunset and think about nuclear fusion. You hold a baby and think about mortality. You laugh with friends and feel the ghost of future loss. Everything is layered. Nothing is simple. And this complexity, This inability to experience anything at face value creates an exhaustion that other people simply don't understand. Your relationships bear the scars of this depth. Partners who wanted light and easy, who said you made everything too complicated, who got frustrated when you wanted to discuss the meaning of commitment instead of just enjoying the moment. Friends who said you ruined the vibe by asking why we're all so afraid of silence. Family members who told you to stop being so serious, to lighten up, to just let things be simple for once. You tried, you really did. You learned to dim yourself, to ask shallow questions, to laugh at jokes you didn't find funny, to pretend that life was simple and easy and uncomplicated. But dimming yourself feels like dying slowly. Every time you suppress a deep question or pretend to care about superficial things, you lose a small piece of what makes you you. And here's what no one tells you about this. Here's the part that changes everything. Your depth isn't a flaw. The world tried to convince you otherwise. Teachers said you thought too much. Parents said you were too sensitive. Friends said you were too intense. But they were wrong. Deep thinkers create the art that changes culture, the innovations that shift paradigms, the questions that revolutionize how we understand ourselves. Every major philosophical breakthrough came from someone who refused to accept surface-level answers. Every psychological insight came from someone willing to examine the darkness that others preferred to ignore. You feel everything, and that means you understand everything. Your analysis isn't neurotic overthinking. It's pattern recognition that saves lives. You see the warning signs of suicide that others miss. You understand the roots of addiction because you've traced them through family systems and trauma responses. You can help people because you've done the work of understanding human pain at a level most people never reach. The world needs people who think in layers, who ask uncomfortable questions, who refuse to accept easy answers. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly enough. The people who couldn't handle it weren't your people, and your people do exist. They're just rare. You probably met one or two in your entire life. Those conversations that went until 4 a.m. and still felt too short. The person who understood your references without explanation. The friend who wanted to discuss philosophy and psychology and meaning instead of just talking about surface-level events. Those moments when you didn't have to translate yourself, when you could speak your native language and be understood. Those people are out there, and when you find them, you'll understand that all the years of loneliness were worth it, because shallow connections with hundreds of people could never compare to one deep connection with someone who sees you. But you also need to create boundaries with your own mind. Your brain will analyze forever if you let it. You need to practice what psychologists call cognitive containment. Set a timer for thinking about complex topics, 20 minutes to dissect that conversation, and then you consciously move on. Write your thoughts down to externalize them. Your brain wants to solve everything, but some things don't have solutions, and you need to make peace with that. Find creative outlets for your depth. Write, paint, make music. Create something that channels the complexity instead of just cycling it internally. Your depth needs expression, not just introspection. The thoughts that haunt you at 3 a.m. might become the art that saves someone else. Accept that you will never be normal. Stop trying to fit into a mold that was never built for people like you. Normal is a setting on a washing machine, not a human ideal. Your weird, intense, complicated brain is exactly what the world needs. The parts of you that feel too much, that think too deeply, that see too clearly, those aren't problems to fix. They're gifts to cultivate. If you're reading this and feeling seen for the first time, you're not broken. You're not too much. You're not defective. You're a deep thinker in a shallow world. And that's always going to feel like drowning until you find your depth. So, here's my question for you. What's the thought you've been turning over in your mind for weeks that you can't let go of? The question that keeps you awake, the pattern you keep seeing, the thing you notice that no one else seems to see. Tell me in the comments. Maybe your people are there, waiting to finally have a real conversation,